first met Arthur about 15 years ago or so, and a few months later, he sent me a script. My agent actually called me and said, listen, we have a new script that Arthur Laurents just sent you, and he would like you to direct it. Well, of course, everybody, including my agent, told me, run for the hills. Don't do it. Arthur eats directors for breakfast. He'll chew you up and spit you out. But I had a different instinct. I had dinner with Arthur, and we really clicked. There was something very refreshingly honest about him. I know he's known for his candid views, his honesty, which sometimes can be disarming and sometimes fearful. But for me, he's one of the only people in this business that I've ever met who will tell you what he thinks of something, and then 2 weeks later you won't hear from someone else what he really thought, because you already know what he really thought, because he tells you the truth. And that's a real valuable asset in this community, in the theater. I also think he happens to be one of the most extraordinary writers that the theater has. So we've had a mutual admiration society now for about 15 years, sometimes me directing his plays, sometimes me producing his plays at George Street Playhouse, the theater that I am the artistic director at. Recently, I worked with him as his associate director on West Side Story. So it's been a lot of different hats, but we have a great relationship. So let's go in and talk to him.
Arthur!
Sam!
All right, I'll sit there.
All right.
So,
Now, how soon can we get this over?
All right, well, one of the things that I've been thinking about lately, as you prepare this new play, Come Back, Wherever You Are, I don't even know what number play that is for you. Do you have any idea how
No.
many? No. No. Many, many plays later.
That's better.
That's
a good beginning, actually.
There are very few writers that I know of that have written for as long as you and have the length and the breadth of your career.
Well, for one thing, they haven't lived as long.
I wasn't going to say that, but
Well, let's
I think
be honest.
Shaw was older than you when he died. So I do notice that writers of your breadth in the career are very rare in terms of people who have written. I think you started writing for the radio.
Yes.
And then you went to theater, and then you went to Hollywood, and then you came back to Broadway, and then you started writing musicals, and you wrote novels, and you've written just about every genre I can think of. And you're still going, you're still writing.
Well, that's why I've lived this long.
The writing keeps you alive.
Well, a doctor told me something that we all like to believe that turns out to be true. Part of it is genes, but he said, the fact that my creative juices are still flowing and that I love what I'm doing affects every organ in the body. So unfortunately, you're going to have to put up with me, according to him, at least 25 more years. Whether I can put up with it is something else.
Well, I don't doubt it. I certainly don't doubt it. I mean, you do have more energy than most of the writers I work with.
I think it's because I love what I do, and that's why I do it, not for what will happen to it. And I think that's the most important thing in work anyway. You do it because you love it. And that, if you can please yourself, it's enormously satisfying. What happens to it, for me, isn't as much. When I direct, I do it for the actors, I want them. But when I write, it's for me.
And you don't really care what happens with it?
I don't think about that, no. This play, Come Back, I wrote for a very personal reason. I wanted to know how I was dealing with the death of Tom. That's Tom Hatcher, whom I shared my life with for 52 years. If a playwright has somebody who is really a good editor, Tom was. I would read him the first scene, and he knew what to say and how to say it and when to say it. And he also was unsparing, but I laugh because there were things, particularly with directing, when I thought, well, I'm getting by with this, and along would come Mr. Hatcher and say, well, it's good and good, but that doesn't work, and you know it. I said, yes, I know it. A lot of writers don't want to rewrite. They don't want to cut.
No.
They don't want to change, which is foolish. I mean, one of the reasons I now write on a computer is very simple. It's so easy to rewrite, particularly if you have the slightest neatness fetish. I mean, if you're writing on, I used to write on a legal pad with a black wing pencil and then transfer it to a typewriter. But then you have to rewrite, and that meant rewriting the whole, retyping the whole page. Too much, I'd say the hell. Rewriting, which is glorious, I love it.
And it's so much easier.
Now, well, you can, I would imagine like sculpting. You're feeling your way, and you type this, and you look at it and think, God, that's awful. But there's something there, and sometimes it can be a word. And you change a word, now you know where you are. But you can't have anybody to tell you that. That you know yourself. I think one of the problems young writers have is they don't know what they're writing and why. It's the same thing about life. What is it you want? Most people don't know.
Yeah.
Because I think if you know what you want, you can get it. Because if you really want it, you will have to work for it. So if you really know what a play is, you will write it and say, but that's not really it. So you go back, and you go back. I wrote a play, and I wrote the first scene. I wasn't sure what it was, and Tom read it. And he said, write another one. Didn't comment. So I wrote another one. And he said, write another one. I said, another? I had no idea where I was going with this play. There was something in the back of something. So I wrote another one, and then he asked something that he'd never asked before. He said, would you mind if I cut it? And he cut it. And when I read what he cut, I saw,
that's what I'm headed
that's
for.
what I mean. And then the play flew.
And that's something that, a style of writing that evolved later in your life, right? I mean, because you used to sit down knowing...
I would always outline it before.
You would outline.
I never know where it's going to end.
Yeah. Now you never, because you always call me and say,
No.
I'm all excited by this character. I don't know where they're headed or what they're going to do next.
This play now that I'm writing, the first half hour I'm so excited about it. And then I thought, what happens next? Oh, God. I'll worry about that when I get there. But it's like living.
I find people don't know how to read plays.
Very few
Not
people.
many people know how to write plays.
Very few people know how to read a play.
Well, I think the hard part, or for most people in reading your plays, is that, like an iceberg, there's only about 10% that's actually on the surface. Most of what you write is underneath the dialogue.
Because that's true of people. People get upset about me, let me put it that way, because I always say what I think. Almost nobody does. People say very often the opposite of what they think, or more what they think you want them to say. So the characters in my plays, what they really think, they usually don't get around to saying until very late in the day.
Yes.
And even then you miss it.
Whenever you'll ask me about a new play I've just read, when you say, what's it about?
That's the first thing I always ask.
Yeah.
What is a play about?
And it's usually not the plot or what the circumstances of the play, the characteristics of the play at all, but rather, what's the play beneath the play? What's the play?
Well, a lot of writers don't know the difference between plot and story. The plot of a play is not the story of the play. The plot is what happens, who took the money out of the safe, or who knocked up the farmer's daughter. But the story is, what does this person want, and how are they getting it? And why do they want it? Why, I think, is the most important question to be asked. Why does the character say or do what he or she does? Another thing I find has changed radically in the theater since I came into it, almost nobody knows anything about structure, nor do they think about it.
I find that when you wrote in that book, your memoirs, it was basically an emotional journey, so that one emotional circumstance in your life brought up to mind at someone else.
I learned that in radio.
This is where you began, right?
I learned two things in radio. Well, more than two. One was how to be concise. I mean, don't blather on and on. Maybe that's why it's hard to read. I mean, say it and run. But it was the first professional person who told me I could write. The editor of some, I don't know, I wrote for so many terrible radio series, it's a blur. Anyway, he said to me, you're too facile with words. You make transitions with words. Transitions are always emotional. And he was right, and it's the best piece of advice anybody gave me.
You've often said that it's the emotion that comes first, and then the action follows that.
Oh, absolutely.
And then the story comes out of that character's emotion.
Yeah.
That plot is really character-driven.
Yeah. Oh, character is the most important thing. Every time I write a play, I learn the same lessons again and again. One, just what you said, it's character. And the character, not strong, you really have to think, what is he or she really? What are they really? And it's, unless there's something really idiosyncratic, individual, you're writing a cliche. And therefore, to start with, your play is uninteresting. One of the few rules I believe in is content determines form. What amuses me is that playwriting is taught by well-known playwrights whom, to my knowledge, know nothing about structure. So it's continuing the tradition. You know what action painting was? They threw the paint on the wall and said, that's a picture. Well, they throw the words on the page, they said, that's a play. Curtain, that means it's over.
And even, I mean, I know you have all these paintings all around your home that you and Tom have collected. I know Tom was and you are a big art lover. And I'm reminded, you know, of Picasso and how when I first saw not even, before even the Blue Period and before even that, his drawings of portraits, they're absolutely realistic, meticulous detail.
Well,
And you'd never know Picasso drew them, but that's what he started with.
Picasso was a big influence on me as a playwright, because the first time I went to Europe, they were having Picasso retrospectives all over Europe. And you saw how he started a traditional craftsman and made his way to ladies with 2.5 faces.
Yes.
And it was fascinating. It's also fascinating if you look at the playwrights who have really lasted, who they start with observing the strict rules.
Yes.
Nobody more so than Shakespeare,
Yeah.
who was a great structuralist. And then
By the end, you're at Cymbeline of Winter's Tale and The Tempest.
Where is the structure?
Yeah.
It's there, but it's very loose.
I've noticed a lot of these playwrights that have long careers become fascinated not just with notions of the mystical or the other or the afterlife, if there is one or isn't, but also the writing style reflects it as well. That their style becomes more and more abstract or certainly less structured, more intuitive, You
There's
know.
one thing I wonder about it.
Yeah.
This is the questioning side of me.
Yeah.
Maybe they do it to feel young.
Huh. Because that kind of writing
Because
is
that kind
associated
of
with
writing
being
has
young.
been coming in, and they think,
Uh,
I don't want to be an old fogey.
uh-huh.
I don't want to write that well-structured thing.
Uh-huh.
You know, which is very hard to do, by the way.
Oh, yeah. You don't read very much of it.
It's interesting about, you know, they say, who influenced you? Well, in the beginning, I was influenced by three rather different people. Lillian Hellman, who knew how to structure a play better than anyone. Thornton Wilder, because I was mad about Skin of Our Teeth. When I was in the Army and I was in New York, and we'd go to the USO where you got free tickets. Well, I saw everything they was playing in New York, and they were all terrible except Skin of Our Teeth. So I saw it over and over and over. But even then, I knew the last act was no good. And the third one was Philip Barry, who wrote high comedies, and which I do, and I don't think anybody else does.
It's interesting, those are three such different writers, and Lillian Hellman, at least in my view of them, Lillian Hellman was so great at structure and telling stories. And Thornton Wilder, while, you know, he does tell a story like, you know, Our Town, but so many of his plays, including Skin of Our Teeth, are to me wildly
they're loose.
abstract and sort of,
well, he was heavily influenced by James Joyce.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. They even claimed that he lifted some of Skin of Our Teeth from Finnegan's Wake,
You're
which
kidding.
of course you've read.
I've read Finnegan's Wake.
You have?
I had to in school.
More than I
had
have.
to go. You remember I was in the Jesuits. So.
Oh, Jesuits.
Yeah.
Well, that.
So James Joyce was,
you know,
we had to,
It's all right.
do all that. But that's really interesting. And then the third, Philip Barry, as you say, wrote these high comedies, had the sophistication, but had, like an iceberg, had this huge underbelly that was emotional. There have been a lot of young writers that I've worked with who have become very successful.
Well, you say they've become very successful.
Successful, I mean, well, there you go again. What's that mean, successful?
What I interpret that to mean, they wrote a play and then they went on to Hollywood.
Money.
Yeah, well, I don't consider that success.
Yeah.
In Hollywood, the writer has absolutely no control unless he's the director.
And you're lucky because you've experienced all that, so you know.
Well, from the very beginning, I had failure of different kinds, which was some of the best thing that ever happened to me. My first play, Home of the Brave, which got a lot of attention in the press, and I remember Thornton Wilder wanted to meet me. I was just amazed. I didn't say a word. I was terrified.
Oh, that must have been.
And the play flopped.
Yeah.
I mean, it was what they call success testing,
yes.
a flop. Then, when the first two musicals I wrote, West Side Story and Gypsy, they didn't get a Tony and I didn't get a Tony. And that was very good for me, because that's when I learned the pleasure is in the doing. If you can please yourself, which is the hardest of all, that's all that matters. These statuettes mean nothing. Nobody knows who got one when. And what is it, 50 years later? I don't know.
More.
Yeah, well, they're classics, and where was whoever?
But failures, you know, I know that Nick and Nora was a big failure for you.
Monumental.
Monumental. And yet, as Tom would say, oftentimes the best growth comes out of the biggest failure. And I know certainly for you,
Nick and Nora was a great thing in my life. First of all, it showed me how I let my ego get in the way. Once the thing was underway, I knew it was never going to work. I knew the collaboration was awful. I started it for the wrong reason. Tom kept saying, get out of it. But the ego was, no, I can make it work. Well, I couldn't. I'm not going to go into why it failed. But the point was, I hadn't written a play in 12 years.
When you didn't ignore it?
Not in 12 years.
Wow.
Musicals or directing,
Oh,
but not a play.
Not a play.
And I wrote practically a play a year for 6 or 7 years after that.
Yeah.
And I loved it. And that's where we met.
Yeah.
And your theater, which to me is the best theater in the world to work at, because all anybody cares about is being good.
Yeah.
There is no money.
No, there's certainly no money.
No, I'm sorry about that for the people who work. But they don't care.
No.
Not really. They love what they do.
Yeah.
Everybody who comes there loves it. It's the most nurturing atmosphere in the world. Broadway, as I've said before, is Chernobyl. The poisonous vapors are rising, and they affect everybody. It's sad. But I had a very good agent who actually brought me up in the theater. A man named Harold Friedman.
Oh, yeah.
He said to me, what kind of a playwright do you want to be? I said, what do you mean? Good. He said, what about successful? I said, I'm successful. He said, which comes first? I said, good. He said, I have to know, because I have to know how to handle you. And he knew that, and he treated me that way.
But you know...
Wait 1 minute.
Yeah.
I just want to see how long we've been blathering on
Oh,
here.
yes. How long have we been blathering on?
54 minutes.
Do you want to take a little break?
Clearly, yeah. Arthur, you want to take a break?
This is a picture of Tom and me. It was our 50th anniversary, and it was a surprise party for us. It's one of the last times he was in good health.
Do you remember what that moment was happening?
Yes, that's when they were singing Row, Row, Row Your Boat.
He had written a play. You had written the play.
About Tom and me when they sang Row, Row, Row Your Boat. And as we came from his house to this part of the park, we heard Row, Row, Row Your Boat through the trees.
We had put all the staff, everybody hidden in the back in the park, all through the park, and slowly they emerged singing in round, very quietly, row, row, row your boat. And it was so eerie. It was a great theatrical moment, and yet totally based on Arthur and Tom.
It may have been theatrical to you, it was pure emotion to me.
Yeah.
It was terribly moving. This is the first time I directed or redirected a company of West Side Story that was on its way into London. Oh, it was a wonderful company. They had never, all they knew was to sing and dance. They didn't have a clue how to act either. And they just took to it like the proverbial. They were wonderful, had a great time. Throw it out the window.
I'll put it back. Oh, Gypsy.
Yeah. This is the opening night of Gypsy at the St. James Theater on Broadway with Patti LuPone and Boyd Gaines and Laura Benanti. It was very funny. And Steve Sondheim standing on the side. I was standing with Steve, and Patti said, Arthur, come over here with your company. And over I went. God, what a wonderful company. And what a wonderful experience.
Calling the House Un-American Activities Committee to order, Chairman J. Parnell Thomas of New Jersey opens an inquiry into possible communist penetration of the Hollywood film industry.
All right, the blacklisting. Jolson sings again. And you know, I worked on that play with you, but you also clearly wrote The Way We Were about that. What happened to you?
I was blacklisted. It was curious the way I found out. Jerry Robbins, who was an informer, it's amazing what it does to people. Anyway, I had written an outline for a musical when I was still in the Army, and he and I first met. It was called Look Ma, I'm Dancing. And I was also going to a crazed psychoanalyst who made me, he almost made me crazier than I was, which was going some. And he said, I won't do his German accent because it comes out Japanese, but he said, don't be versatile.
What do you mean, don't be versatile?
Write a musical, and I was a playwright.
Oh.
I was serious. There's a fake accent. Anyway, years passed. Now Jerry is doing a movie of Look Ma, I'm Dancing, which somebody else wrote, and which was a flop. And he wanted me to write it for films. So it was for Paramount, and they said my agent was asking too much money. Well, he hadn't asked any. So they smelled.
That's how you realized.
They smelled a big rodent. And
his name was Arthur Laurents.
yes, and I was unemployable. Well, I had been in love with somebody, and that was over, and I'd had Hollywood, so I didn't care much. And I was blacklisted there.
In Hollywood,
In
you were
Hollywood.
blacklisted.
No one was ever blacklisted in the theater.
This is a big point you bring up in the play, Jolson Sings Again, because like
people like Jerry
Robbins,
or
yeah.
Kazan,
or Ilya Kazan, that was the...
they could always work in the theater.
Yeah. This subject of the blacklisting, it's been a huge part of your life.
Still is. Do you know, it was just today,
Blacklist.
talking with my doctor about something else, that I realized why informing still haunts me.
Why?
Because it's about disloyalty.
Yeah. Betrayal.
It's betrayal.
Yeah.
And having been betrayed recently
Yes.
so many times, and to know that you're a fool if you think you're an exception. When somebody is an informer, I think it's in Jolson, it says,
Yes.
he's not evil because he informed because he's evil.
Yeah.
And only evil people betray you.
Well, and you always, there's another line, I think, that says that you're born an informer.
Oh, I think so.
Yeah.
So I was in New York, and I couldn't get a job in television either. So I thought, I was young. Everybody was going to Paris. Why not go? So I went.
But since you couldn't write movies, is that what brought you back to New York, to write back in the theater?
No, I came back here partly because I started a play, but another reason, I didn't believe a writer, the kind of writer I wanted to be, could be an expatriate. I never wanted to be an expatriate. I knew you had to go, at least I had to come home. And I'd started this play, Time of the Cuckoo.
That's the first play you wrote when you came back?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And that became this beautiful travelogue called Summertime.
Yes, with Catherine
And
Hepburn.
then this unfortunate musical called Do I Hear a Waltz?
Right.
With music, with lyrics by Steve Sondheim, music by Richard Rodgers, who is also the producer, which is a deadly idea. If the producer is one of the authors, you're dead. He has control.
You write about that a lot in your books, about who has the power, especially in the world of musical theater. You've often said the book writer in a musical is the low man on the totem pole, because the composer and the lyricist always tend to get...
Well, he's the low man on the totem pole in the eyes of the world and the critics and people who write about it. They never refer, when they refer to a musical, it's the composer and the lyricist. They never mention the book writer. That's because the musical comes from operetta, and operetta comes from opera. And who wrote the libretto of...
That's right, La Boheme or any of them.
Any of them.
Yeah. You had to fight, as I remember, you had to fight really hard to get through the Dramatists Guild and to fight for the rights of the book writer in musicals, didn't you?
Well, I didn't have to fight too hard. I just refused to do West Side Story unless I got a piece of the album. And they said, take it. That was the first time.
First time that a book writer had gotten royalties on an album, on a record.
And I want to tell you, it paid off.
Oh, I know.
The album was, of West Side didn't sell. They thought the score was terrible, including the producers. They gave up their share in it. They said, take it. Nobody wants to hear that. So nobody did till they made the movie. Then the soundtrack, the money kept rolling in.
Well, the soundtrack became the highest selling soundtrack in motion picture history.
Thank God.
From the artistic point of view, writing a book to a musical is a very difficult skill, I feel, and very few people have it.
It is very difficult. The musicals I've written an outline that everybody starts from, and I write ahead. And when I work with Steve Sondheim, for example, he does what he calls rearrange the dialogue for the lyrics.
I remember with Something's Coming.
Something's Coming came straight out of a speech.
It's almost the exact same speech.
It is. It's just elongated. I used to believe that in a musical, everything built to the song. That was the peak of the emotion. And the song carried things forward. I don't know anymore.
You don't believe that anymore?
Because the form of musicals has changed. The so-called new musicals are new in the music and very old-fashioned in the book.
Yeah.
For example, Spring Awakening, where I think the music, and I don't like rock, I think the music is gorgeous. And they talk about the Vatican play, how radical, well, it was,
Yeah, back in the
15th century. But what is it about? An ignorant boy knocks up an ignorant girl, she has an ignorant abortion, she dies, he cries. I mean, slightly corny, I would say. But they talk about it being new.
Well, I think with that, it was more about the way it was done.
Oh, the way it is done, the style is wonderful. Bill T. Jones, his musical staging was the most original I've seen in years.
Yeah.
And that was brilliant.
Collaboration in the musical is a very different...
Well, yes, it should be very different. Sometimes I think the book writer and the composer and lyricist haven't met. I mean, they're that disparate in their style.
Before you get into that, I know you're going to talk about Winnie Holzman, who wrote the book to Wicked. And one of the things that you talked about, encouragement, the man who first gave you as a young writer the encouragement that you could write, that you had talent, and what a huge thing that was to you.
Oh, Professor Raymond Short.
Who said you have talent.
He has said to me, you're a writer.
You're a writer.
And I cried.
Do you remember, I can see, because I can see even in your eyes, the moment of him telling you...
I will never forget it.
You're a writer.
It is one of the...
It's still emotionally right there.
It's one of the biggest moments in my life.
Why was it so important? That someone had faith?
Well, because by that point, before that, he had told me I needed special remedial writing. Because I've been ill-advised by the older guys at college. I was a freshman. And I thought, well, if I can't write, what am I doing?
You knew you had to be a writer.
When I was 10, I knew I wanted.
10?
10, I knew I wanted to be a writer.
How?
And I wrote in dialogue. So obviously it had to be the theater. That made the whole difference in my life.
And it was a teacher when you were in school.
Yeah.
Because years later, I think it's pretty incredible, and I think very few people know about it and would love to hear. you had an extraordinary class that you taught at NYU.
Oh, I loved it.
And Winnie Holzman was
Winnie
one of the
Holzman
students.
was in the class.
But also, in the same class,
George Wolfe.
George C. Wolfe.
There were a lot of them.
Yeah.
A lot of them.
And that, I know that you had the same kind of, because Winnie Holzman has told me, you had the same impact on her emotionally then that clearly that man had on you back in
But here's where
Cornell.
plot and story and musicals all come together. Winnie and Stephen Schwartz, they wrote this musical based on a novel
Right.
about the Wicked Witch of Oz, called Wicked. They had a reading for Universal Pictures. They got $12 million. They got a producer. They got a director. They got a theater. So they asked me to read it. And I said, well, I don't think it's very good. Well, that's surprising, I suppose, from me. I said,
I have to interrupt because I remember I was out in Quogue with you when you got that script.
really?
Yep. And you read it because you were very upset because you did not think it was very good. And you said to me, what do I do?
What do I do?
love Winnie so much. I'm so fond of this girl and I love her and I don't want to, but I have to be honest. I don't want to
also,
hurt
what good
her.
am I if I don't help?
That's right.
So I said to them, you don't know what it's about. And they said, it's about the Wizard of Oz. I said, no, it isn't. It's about the friendship between two teenage girls. Now, they didn't know it at that point.
Well, there were so many plots working in it that they were so confused
But the girls,
as to what it was.
that wasn't in it.
Right.
The best song in the show, which is popular, wasn't in it.
Right.
So I said, start tracking the friendship in every scene. Well, they did, and the thing began coming to life. I'm not going into the whole thing.
But what's interesting about that to me is that, again, you were able to say, what is it about?
Well, that's
and it's
the first-
about those two girls. And therefore, that took you into, in terms of structure and plot, anything that doesn't contribute to those two girls, get rid of. I don't care if it's the wizard and somebody else, get rid of it. And you did the same thing, I remember, you talked about in Gypsy, because at one point they wrote a song for Herbie and somebody else, and you said, if
Well,
it's
the
not
big-
about the mother and the girl...
The big thing was
get rid
Jerry
of it.
Robbins wanted a burlesque show.
Ah.
I said that if you don't have Rose or Louise on stage, you're going to lose the audience. I want a burlesque show. So I wrote one that I tell you would be dirty today. It really was filthy. And we did it in Philadelphia, which is scarcely open-minded. I thought they were...
Brotherly love?
Oh, God, did they hate it. It was wonderful to behold. They hated Merman. Steve Sondheim was in heaven. He stands at the head of the aisle collecting bad remarks. Says, they said it'll never get to New York, hooray! It's like that. But the whole thing with Wicked is, again, it's about story and plot, and what is it about? Musical or a play? It's the same thing. The producers behaved so badly. They brought in another writer, and Winnie started to cry, and I said, Winnie, stop crying right now. I'm not going to put up with self-pity. You get in there and fight. It's your show. Steve, get there and fight. You know, that you can get worn down by these producers and directors who don't know what they're doing.
Well, you know, that reminds me also of The Way We Were, because...
They knew nothing about politics.
They knew nothing about the blacklist. I mean, supposedly the movie was about that, but when you showed me the scene that was written for why Barbara Streisand's character
the whole picture,
broke up with him,
they cut.
they cut.
They knew nothing about it. Nobody did. Not the producer, not Redford, not Streisand.
And you wrote it for Streisand.
I wrote it for her. But she was so into the character. She was like a pack rat. She kept everything they cut, and she fought, and she fought. She won some. They fired me from the picture. She won some, and she lost some. They brought me back, of course. They got in terrible trouble. That's Hollywood. It's so ridiculous. So ridiculous.
You know, when you mentioned Merman, did you write Gypsy for Merman? Or what did you write? She just came, it seemed like she would be the best.
No, I didn't write Gypsy for Merman.
You didn't?
How could you? She couldn't act.
Well.
But I have written for people, I must say, usually it turned out badly. I did write The Way We Were for Barbara, and Barbara was marvelous and behaved marvelously. She was done by the director. There's a big telephone scene. I tell you, if you couldn't win the Oscar with that part, something was wrong with the performance, and it wasn't her.
You're the best friend I ever had. And it would help me so much if you could just come over and you'd see me through tonight. Listen, I promise I won't touch you or beg you or embarrass you. But, you see, I have to talk to my best friend about someone we both know. So could you please come over right away, please?
That telephone call, that is Oscar material. I mean, she's crying, calling the man she loves. You're the only one I can talk to. You're my friend. With her hand over her face. And he let her do it. She put the hand over her face because her nose was running. Let it run. Let it snow.
Well, you may not write all the time for stars, but you have often written with friends in mind as the character.
Yes,
and
but
how
they
that
get in the way.
They get in the way.
I think for me, when I write about something of someone I know, you remember you were a big help to me.
Oh, yeah.
You and Simon.
Yes.
About come back, because I was letting the real person get in the way.
Yeah.
You have to get them out of the way.
Yeah.
Because you're hampered by what you feel about that person. And that prevents you from seeing them in the round. It's much more exciting to invent and make them up. And also, it does reach a point, I mean, this sounds like nonsense, but it's true, when suddenly the character takes over. It really does. And you find them doing things that you didn't think of. Now somebody's going to say, oh, it's like the Ouija board. But I'm telling you, it happens. And when it does, it's wonderful.
You do tend to write a lot of political backdrops, whether it's the gang wars in West Side Story or the blacklisting in Jolson Sings Again, or the first play we worked together on, The Wall Street, in the background. But it's always, to me, all your plays are always about the same thing, which is the struggle to find love. It's always about love and finding that love.
Love is the most important thing in life. Love and people. I mean, if you love your work, you are so far, because you spend so much of your life at work. If you love what you do, really love it, and do it because you love it, not because what will happen to it, you are way ahead.
Yeah.
And then if you find someone to love or friends to love and who love you, that's the best.
Well, we have that.
Yes, we do.
And it helps both of our lives.
Oh, enormously, enormously.
And you have had that 52-year relationship with Tom and Quag and his park. Because people often say, well, where does a writer write or where do they get their inspiration? That's really where you write, do you?
Oh, well, I sit in the park. You've sat there with me. And he is there, dead or not, he is there. He, in that park, will last longer than anything I've written, including West Side Story. Roll in your grave, Jerry Robbins, but that's true. And Lenny Bernstein.
That's a good end, isn't it?
It is good.
This is a birthday card I got for my 92nd birthday. I think it applies to anybody in the theater. We didn't come here to fit in. We came here to be who we are. We didn't come here to work. We came here to live our dreams. We didn't come here for the stuff. We came here to love each other. We didn't come here by accident. We each came here with a purpose that is uniquely our own. And you open it and it says, be, dream, love, thrive. It's the greatest card anybody ever got.